The rain had stopped an hour ago, leaving the streets of Greenwich slick with reflections of streetlights and passing headlights. Emily Carter tightened her coat around her as she stood before the Whitmore mansion, a house so large and still that it seemed to hold its breath. The iron gates loomed high, flanked by perfectly trimmed hedges, and beyond them stretched a cobblestone driveway leading to the kind of home people usually saw in architectural magazines: stately columns, tall arched windows, and a front door so glossy it reflected the night sky. She hesitated before ringing the bell. The ad had been vague. Live-in nanny wanted for one child. Must be discreet, reliable, and willing to work flexible hours. No mention of pay, no details about the family, just a callback number. It was a desperate choice, maybe even a foolish one, but when the call came offering her an interview, she had said yes before thinking twice. After her mother's funeral, the bills had piled up faster than she could breathe. Her degree in law meant little without a job, and her savings barely covered rent for another month. The door opened soundlessly, revealing a woman whose age could have been anywhere between 35 and 45. Mrs. Whitmore was elegant in a way that made Emily instantly aware of the scuff marks on her shoes and the rain in her hair. She wore a cream silk blouse, diamond earrings that caught the light, and a faint trace of Chanel perfume that lingered as she stepped aside. "You must be Miss Carter," she said, her tone calm, composed, but distant, like someone reciting a practiced line. "Come in. My husband and I have been expecting you." The interior of the house smelled faintly of lemon polish and old wood. Everything gleamed: the marble floors, the glass chandeliers, the framed oil paintings that lined the hallway. The kind of wealth that didn't just say money, it whispered legacy. Emily followed Mrs. Whitmore through a corridor that opened into a living room bigger than her entire apartment. A grand piano sat in the corner, untouched. Bookshelves stretched to the ceiling, filled with volumes that looked arranged for display rather than use. A tall man was waiting by the window. He didn't turn when they entered, only spoke after a long moment. "So, this is the candidate?" "Yes, dear," Mrs. Whitmore replied smoothly. "Emily Carter." Mr. Whitmore turned, and his eyes, pale gray, sharp, studied Emily with the kind of scrutiny that made her feel transparent. His features were refined but stern, like someone who had forgotten how to smile. "You've worked with children before?" "Yes," Emily said quickly. "During my studies, I volunteered at a daycare center. I also babysat part-time." He nodded once, uninterested in the details. "And you have no distractions? No relationships, no habits that would interfere with your work?" Emily blinked. "No, sir." "Good," he said. "We value reliability here, and discretion. You'll find that our household runs on order, not chaos. If you can keep it that way, you'll have no trouble." Mrs. Whitmore's smile softened slightly. "Please don't mind my husband's bluntness. He just means we expect privacy." "I understand," Emily said, though she wasn't sure she did. They led her upstairs to a guest room overlooking the forest that bordered the estate. The walls were pale blue, the bed neatly made, a vase of fresh lilies on the nightstand. It felt too perfect, like a set piece from a movie. "This will be your room," Mrs. Whitmore said. "Oliver's room is down the hall. He's 6. A sweet boy, though. A little quiet." As they left her to unpack, Emily caught sight of herself in the mirror. Damp hair, nervous eyes, a girl pretending to be confident. She told herself it was just a job, a place to stay, money to earn, nothing more. But as night fell, and she heard the faint, eerie creak of the mansion settling into silence, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had stepped into a story that had already begun long before she arrived. The next morning began with soft piano music echoing through the house. Mrs. Whitmore was sitting at the instrument in a white robe, fingers gliding across the keys in a melody that sounded both fragile and deliberate. Emily hesitated at the doorway until the woman gestured her closer. "You're up early," Mrs. Whitmore said without looking up. Oliver usually has breakfast at 8. He prefers pancakes. He'll tell you that he hates syrup, but he doesn't. He's just trying to imitate his father. Emily smiled politely. He sounds thoughtful. Mrs. Whitmore laughed softly, the sound brittle. He's lonely, Miss Carter. That's what he is. Later, Emily met Oliver, a small boy with a mop of brown hair and wide blue eyes that seemed too aware for his age. He sat at the kitchen table drawing dinosaurs with colored pencils, glancing up shyly when Emily greeted him. "Hi, Oliver," she said, crouching down to his level. "I'm Emily, your new babysitter." He nodded but didn't speak. Instead, he pushed one of the drawings toward her, a tall T-Rex with teeth like daggers. In the corner of the page, he had drawn a tiny stick figure, half erased. "Is that you?" Emily asked. He shook his head. "That's Daddy." She smiled uncertainly. "And where's Mommy?" Oliver's pencil paused. "Mommy's usually sad," he said simply, then went back to coloring. Emily's stomach tightened, but she said nothing. Over the next few weeks, she settled into a rhythm. Mornings were quiet, afternoons spent reading or walking Oliver through the garden, evenings filled with the distant sound of Mr. Whitmore's voice echoing from his office. He worked in finance, or at least that's what Mrs. Whitmore said when Emily asked. He came home late, smelled of cigars and whiskey, and often ignored his wife completely. One night, Emily was tucking Oliver into bed when she heard the first argument. It started as a whisper, a low hiss of voices behind the study door, then grew sharper. "You think I don't see what you're doing?" Mrs. Whitmore's voice cracked. "The insurance papers, the meetings with your lawyer." "Lower your voice," Mr. Whitmore snapped. "You're paranoid." Paranoid. The word lingered in Emily's mind long after the voices faded. The next morning, Mrs. Whitmore came down to breakfast with sunglasses on, though the room was dim. She smiled too brightly, spoke too quickly, and when Oliver asked why Daddy wasn't eating with them, she just said, "He's busy, sweetheart." Emily noticed things after that, subtle things, the way Mr. Whitmore's hand sometimes brushed his wife's shoulder, not with affection, but with control, the way she flinched when he raised his voice, the way the servants kept their eyes lowered, as if the walls themselves were listening. It wasn't her place to interfere. She told herself that over and over. She was just the babysitter, a guest in a house that didn't belong to her. But one evening, as she was cleaning the living room, she found something strange, a small glass bottle on the bar cart, tucked behind the whiskey decanter. The label had been peeled off, and the liquid inside shimmered faintly blue under the light. She picked it up, then heard footsteps. Quickly, she set it back where she'd found it. Mr. Whitmore entered, his gaze immediately finding hers. "You seem curious," he said, his tone mild but sharp underneath. "Just cleaning, sir." "Good. Keep it that way." He poured himself a drink from the decanter, not the bottle, but his eyes never left hers until she excused herself. That night, she couldn't sleep. The image of the bottle haunted her. The house seemed to hum with quiet secrets. She thought about the word discretion, the one he'd emphasized during her interview. She thought about her mother's voice, how she used to say, "If something feels wrong, it probably is." So she made a decision. The next day, while Mrs. Whitmore took Oliver to piano lessons, Emily ordered a small nanny cam online, shaped like a clock, subtle enough to disappear among the decor. She told herself it was for Oliver's safety, that if anything happened while she was away, there'd be proof. But deep down, she knew it wasn't just that. She wanted to know the truth about the Whitmores. When the camera arrived, she placed it on the mantel above the fireplace, facing the center of the living room. From there, it could see almost everything: the couch, the bar cart, the doorways. She felt a flicker of guilt, but also relief. For the first time, she wasn't blind. Days passed. Nothing happened. The Whitmores argued less, or maybe just more quietly. Life in the mansion settled into uneasy calm. Emily began to wonder if she had overreacted. Then came Sunday afternoon. The air was warm, sunlight pouring through the high windows. Emily was dusting the shelves when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned just as Mrs. Whitmore entered, phone pressed to her ear, her face pale with frustration. "I told you not to call me here," she hissed into the receiver. "If Harold finds out—" The sound of the study door slamming open cut her off. Mr. Whitmore strode in, his expression thunderous. "Who are you talking to?" "It's none of your business," she snapped, shoving the phone into her purse. He grabbed her wrist. "Everything in this house is my business." "Let go of me!" They struggled, a brief, violent motion. And then it happened. His arm hit the side table. The vase toppled. The crash echoed like a gunshot. Emily froze, heart hammering, the broom still in her hand. The Whitmores turned, their fight forgotten, eyes locking onto her as if she had just pulled the trigger. "What have you done?" Mrs. Whitmore gasped. "That vase! It's worth more than your life!" Emily stammered. I didn't touch it." "Don't lie!" Mr. Whitmore's voice boomed, the anger in it raw, hungry for someone to blame. She felt her pulse quicken, but her voice came out calm. "You're right," she said quietly. "Let's not argue. Why don't we just check the camera?" Both froze. "What camera?" Mrs. Whitmore whispered. "The one I installed," Emily said, "for Oliver's safety." Their faces changed. Confusion first, then dawning alarm. And in that suspended moment, before the truth unfurled, Emily realized that the story she had stepped into wasn't about childcare or broken vases at all. It was about something darker, something that had been waiting to be seen. As she reached for the remote, the faint red light on the mantel clock blinked steadily, recording every breath in the room. And that was how the truth began to surface. Quietly, mercilessly, like a shadow breaking through glass. The air that Sunday evening was thick and strange, as if the house itself had taken a breath it could not release. After the vase had shattered and tempers flared, the Whitmores had withdrawn to their respective corners of the mansion. Mrs. Whitmore upstairs, silent and pale, and Mr. Whitmore locked in his study, the faint sound of ice clinking in glass marking his presence. Emily was left alone in the living room with the aftermath, shards of porcelain glittering across the floor like frozen tears. She swept them up slowly, every motion deliberate. The sound of the broom bristles on marble echoed through the empty halls, each scratch a whisper of something broken beyond repair. The memory of Mrs. Whitmore's trembling voice, "That vase is worth more than your life," still lingered in her ears, but it wasn't the accusation that haunted her. It was the way they had looked at her when she mentioned the camera, that flicker of shock, of fear, of exposure. When she finished cleaning, she sat down on the couch and stared at the mantel where the small black clock rested innocently, its red recording light still blinking. Her heartbeat slowed as she realized what she had done. She hadn't just protected herself. She had stepped into something bigger, something dangerous. The house was quiet now, unnaturally so. Even the grandfather clock in the hall seemed hesitant to tick too loudly. Emily stood, the weight of decision pressing against her chest, and went upstairs to check on Oliver. The boy was asleep, his small body curled beneath the blankets, a stuffed dinosaur tucked under his arm. The nightlight cast a gentle glow across his face, softening the world's cruelty for a few precious hours. Emily brushed a strand of hair from his forehead and whispered, "Sleep well, buddy." Then she turned off the hall light and closed the door halfway, leaving a crack for safety, the same way her mother used to do. As she made her way back to her room, she heard a faint sound coming from the end of the corridor. Muffled voices, low but tense. She stopped. The study door was slightly ajar, a sliver of warm lamplight spilling into the dark hallway. "You made a fool of yourself!" Mr. Whitmore's voice said, tight with anger. "Screaming like that in front of the help!" "I was terrified, Harold!" Mrs. Whitmore hissed. "You grabbed me because you were lying to me." Emily stood perfectly still, her pulse loud in her ears. She knew she should leave. This was none of her business, but her feet refused to move. "You think I don't notice?" Mr. Whitmore continued, his tone softening in a way that made it even more menacing. "The calls, the messages. You're careless, Vivian. Very careless." There was a sharp intake of breath. "You went through my phone? I go through everything that belongs to me." A chair scraped, the sound of glass breaking, then silence. Emily took a step back, afraid the floorboards would creak, and hurried to her room, closing the door quietly behind her. Her hands trembled as she locked it, then she sank onto the bed, trying to steady her breathing. She wanted to tell herself that couples fought all the time, that rich people were dramatic, that this wasn't her world, but the words she'd just heard refused to fade. "Everything that belongs to me." She looked again toward the clock camera, replaying in her mind what it might have captured earlier that day. Not just the broken vase, but everything. The way he'd grabbed his wife, the look in his eyes, the tension that hummed through the house like an invisible current. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Every sound, the whisper of trees outside, the creak of the stairs, made her heart leap. Around 2 a.m., she thought she heard footsteps outside her door. Slow, careful. Then, a pause. A moment later, the handle turned, gently, as if someone was testing whether it was locked. Emily sat up, holding her breath. The door stayed closed. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps retreated. When dawn came, the house looked almost normal again. The morning light softened its edges, masking the cracks beneath the surface. Emily joined Mrs. Whitmore and Oliver for breakfast, pretending she hadn't heard anything. Mrs. Whitmore was quiet, her hands trembling slightly as she buttered toast. There was a faint bruise on her wrist, half hidden beneath her sleeve. Mr. Whitmore was absent, though his coffee cup sat untouched at the end of the table. Oliver pushed his pancakes around his plate. "Daddy yelled again," he said softly, not looking up. Mrs. Whitmore's knife froze. "Eat your breakfast, sweetheart." Emily's heart ached at the boy's tone, the weary resignation in a voice too young to carry it. She reached over, gently adjusting his napkin. "You know," she said, forcing a smile, "when I was your age, I thought pancakes could fix anything." Oliver looked at her for a long moment, then gave a small, fragile smile. "Maybe they can," he whispered. The rest of the day unfolded quietly. The staff moved like ghosts, speaking in hushed tones. Mrs. Whitmore spent the afternoon in her garden, pruning roses that already looked perfect, while Emily helped Oliver build a fort in the living room. Laughter, genuine and light, filled the space for the first time in weeks, and for a moment, Emily almost believed things could be normal. But normal was an illusion. That night, as she reviewed the camera footage on her laptop, her blood ran cold. The video showed everything: the argument, the vase shattering, Mr. Whitmore's hand clamping down on his wife's arm, his voice, low and venomous, saying, "You're lucky that's all that broke." Emily sat in the dark, the glow of the screen painting her face in cold light. She replayed it twice, then closed the file and ejected the memory card, hiding it in the lining of her purse. She didn't know what she would do with it yet, but she knew she couldn't delete it. The next few days were a blur of tension. Mr. Whitmore grew quieter, colder. His eyes followed her longer than before. Once, she caught him standing in the hallway outside her room when she opened the door unexpectedly. He smiled thinly, said something about checking the locks, and walked away. Mrs. Whitmore, meanwhile, seemed to shrink in on herself. She avoided her husband, spoke little, and often retreated to the piano in the evenings, her fingers trembling over the keys as if afraid of the silence between notes. Emily wanted to help her, to say something, anything, but fear held her back. She needed the job. She needed the money. And most of all, she needed to stay invisible. Then, one evening, Mrs. Whitmore knocked on her door. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed. She held a glass of wine that shook slightly in her hand. "Emily," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "May I sit?" "Of course." The woman perched on the edge of the bed, exhaling shakily. "You're good with Oliver. He likes you. He's a wonderful kid." Mrs. Whitmore smiled faintly, then looked toward the window. "You must think we're terrible people." Emily hesitated. "I don't think that." "You should." She took a long sip from her glass. "You see this house? The cars, the art, the parties, they're all lies. We built everything on appearances. Harold built me on appearances." Emily didn't know what to say. Mrs. Whitmore turned to her suddenly. "If something happens to me, if I disappear, promise me you'll take care of Oliver." Emily's chest tightened. "Mrs. Whitmore, promise me." She swallowed hard. "I promise." The woman's shoulders slumped with relief. She finished her wine in one long swallow, stood, and left without another word. That night, Emily couldn't stop thinking about her, about the fear in her eyes, about the bruise, about the bottle on the bar cart. She needed to know what was inside it. When the house finally slept, she crept down the stairs, her bare feet silent on the cold floor. The clock read 1:42 a.m. Moonlight slanted through the tall windows, throwing long shadows across the room. She moved to the bar, her fingers trembling as she reached for the bottle. The same one she'd seen before, label gone, liquid faintly blue. The moment she lifted it, she heard something behind her. A soft click. She turned. Mr. Whitmore was standing in the doorway, wearing his robe, a glass in one hand. His expression was unreadable, calm in a way that chilled her more than anger ever could. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked lightly. I was just getting some water." He stepped closer. Strange choice of bottle for water. Her mouth went dry. "I thought it was—" He cut her off with a raised hand, setting his own glass down. "You're a smart girl, Miss Carter. Too smart, maybe. You notice things." He tilted his head, eyes glinting. "Curiosity can be dangerous in this house." Her heart pounded. "I'm just doing my job." "Good. Keep it that way." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "And remember, this house values silence." He took the bottle gently from her hands, placed it back on the cart, and walked away without looking back. Emily stood there long after he was gone, her hands cold and shaking. She knew now with terrible certainty that she wasn't imagining things. There was something poisonous in that house, maybe not just in the bottle, but in the people who lived there. The next morning she found Mrs. Whitmore in the garden again, humming to herself as she trimmed roses. Her eyes looked distant, almost glassy. "He poured me a drink last night," she murmured when she saw Emily. "Said he wanted to make peace." Emily froze. "Did you drink it?" Mrs. Whitmore smiled faintly. "No, I knocked it over by accident." Relief flooded Emily, but beneath it was fear. Fear of what might have happened if she hadn't. That night she checked the camera again. The new footage made her blood run cold. Mr. Whitmore in the kitchen, late at night, the same blue bottle in his hand, pouring it into a glass of red wine, whispering to himself, "Tomorrow's the meeting about the will. One glass, and everything goes back to how it should be." Emily's fingers trembled as she paused the video. She couldn't breathe. She looked toward the ceiling, where Oliver slept just a floor above, innocent and unaware. Then toward the garden, where Mrs. Whitmore spent her mornings among flowers that would one day bloom over her grave if Emily did nothing. The decision was no longer about survival. It was about conscience. She closed the laptop, took out her phone, and opened her messages. There was only one person she could trust. Her friend Daniel from college, now working in the district attorney's office. Her thumbs hovered over the screen before she typed, "Dan, I think I have evidence of a murder attempt. I need help." She attached the footage, hit send, and stared at the screen until the message confirmed. Delivered. Then she sat back, exhaling for the first time in what felt like forever. The house around her was silent, but she knew the silence wouldn't last, because somewhere behind one of those polished doors, Harold Whitmore was planning his next move. And Emily Carter, the quiet babysitter, had just become part of a deadly game. She turned off the light and lay down, the faint hum of the camera in the living room like a heartbeat in the dark. Morning came too quickly, bleeding pale light through the lace curtains and drawing faint shapes on the walls. Emily lay awake long before the alarm rang, staring at the ceiling, her pulse still unsteady from the night before. The events of the last 24 hours ran through her mind like fragments of a fever dream. The midnight confrontation in the kitchen, the bottle, the threat disguised as a smile. She had sent the video to Daniel. It was out of her hands now, or so she wanted to believe. But the heavy dread that sat at the base of her chest told her otherwise. Nothing was out of his hands. Not yet. Not while she was still inside this house. When she finally forced herself out of bed, she caught her reflection in the mirror. Dark circles under her eyes, skin pale as porcelain. She looked like someone living in the aftermath of a nightmare that hadn't yet ended. The faint scent of coffee drifted up the hallway. Downstairs, she could hear Oliver's small voice, soft, humming something tuneless as he played with his breakfast. That sound alone gave her the strength to move. In the kitchen, sunlight spilled through the tall windows, golden and deceivingly gentle. Mrs. Whitmore was sitting at the island, dressed immaculately in a light blue blouse, her hair pinned up. To anyone else, she looked perfect. But Emily saw the tremor in her hands as she held her teacup. Oliver was at the table, drawing again, the world outside his paper irrelevant. "Good morning," Emily said softly, forcing a smile. Mrs. Whitmore's eyes lifted to her. "You didn't sleep either," she said. It wasn't a question. Emily hesitated. "No. I heard some noise." Mrs. Whitmore gave a faint, humorless smile. "This house is full of noises. Some you hear, some you pretend not to." She turned her head slightly, and Emily caught sight of another bruise beneath the collar of her blouse. It wasn't new. Before she could respond, Mr. Whitmore entered. His presence always seemed to change the temperature of the room. He looked sharp, composed. Charcoal suit, watch glinting under the morning light, every detail deliberate. "Vivian," he said to his wife, not even glancing at Emily, "did you schedule the call with the attorneys?" Mrs. Whitmore set her cup down carefully. "Not yet. I was waiting for you." "Well, don't wait too long." His tone was clipped, final. Then, as if only just noticing Emily, he offered a smile so thin it was almost cruel. "Our Miss Carter. How are you finding things this morning?" Emily forced herself to meet his eyes. "Fine, thank you." "Good," he said. "Oliver behaves for you, doesn't he?" "Yes," she replied, her voice steady but her heart racing. "Excellent. We're fortunate to have you." His gaze lingered a moment too long, as if measuring her words, before he took his coffee and disappeared into his study. The air he left behind was heavy. Mrs. Whitmore didn't move for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was distant. "Do you know what I used to love about mornings? The quiet. Now I hate it. The quiet always comes before something terrible." Emily said nothing. She wanted to tell her she wasn't alone, that she'd seen the footage, that she had proof. But something inside her held her back. Timing mattered. One wrong word, and the woman sitting across from her could end up dead before nightfall. That afternoon, Emily took Oliver to the park. It was one of the rare times she felt they could breathe. The mansion's walls didn't follow them there. The air was lighter, and the sound of children's laughter drowned out the ghosts of the house. Oliver ran through the grass, chasing after a red ball, his laughter bright and pure. Watching him, Emily felt a pang of something almost maternal. She'd never had younger siblings, never thought much about motherhood, but with Oliver, it was different. Protecting him felt instinctive. When he finally tired out, he sat beside her on the bench, legs swinging. "Daddy's angry a lot," he said suddenly. Emily froze. "Why do you think that?" "He yells at Mommy, and sometimes he breaks things." She looked at him gently. "Has he ever hurt you, Oliver?" He shook his head. "No, but he makes Mommy cry. Sometimes she tells me to go to my room so I don't have to hear." Emily swallowed hard. "Do you like living in the big house?" Oliver shrugged. "It's pretty, but it's loud at night. The walls talk." "The walls?" He nodded seriously. "They creak when Daddy walks around, even when Mommy's asleep." Emily's stomach turned cold. She placed a hand on his small shoulder and smiled, though her voice trembled. "Don't worry. I'll make sure you're safe, okay?" He nodded, trusting her completely, a trust that terrified her more than anything else. When they returned home, twilight was falling. The house loomed ahead, its windows glowing like watching eyes. Inside, everything was unnervingly calm. Mr. Whitmore was in his study again, the faint murmur of his voice on the phone carrying through the door. Mrs. Whitmore was in the living room, arranging flowers in a tall glass vase, one of the few that hadn't been broken yet. Emily went upstairs to settle Oliver for the night, reading him a story until his eyelids fluttered shut. She lingered by his bedside a moment longer, then went back downstairs. The air felt thick, like before a storm. As she entered the living room, she saw it, the same blue bottle on the bar cart. It hadn't been there earlier that day. It sat alone, its glass glinting faintly under the chandelier. Her stomach twisted. Mrs. Whitmore was pouring herself a drink. Her hand trembled slightly as she lifted the glass. Emily's breath caught. "Wait," she said, crossing the room quickly. "Let me—" Mrs. Whitmore blinked, startled. "Emily, what's wrong?" "The bottle," Emily said, her voice low. "Don't drink that." The older woman frowned, confused. "It's just—" Before she could finish, a voice came from behind them. "It's just wine, Miss Carter." Mr. Whitmore stood in the doorway, smiling. The light caught the edge of his cufflinks, throwing a brief glint across the room. "You seem tense. Do you have a habit of interrupting my wife's evening routine?" Emily turned slowly, heart pounding. "I just thought—" "You thought?" His tone sharpened. "About what, exactly?" She glanced at Mrs. Whitmore, whose expression had gone blank, not from ignorance, but from fear. He stepped closer. "You've been here how long now? 2 months?" "3. 3, he repeated thoughtfully. "And already you've taken quite an interest in our private affairs." Emily's fingers clenched at her sides. "My job is to look after your son." "Ah, yes, our precious Oliver." He smiled faintly. "Tell me, does he talk to you much? About us? About me?" Her voice came out strained. "He's a child." "Children see everything," he said softly, almost kindly. "That's what makes them dangerous." Mrs. Whitmore set the glass down shakily. "Harold, please." He ignored her. "I think perhaps you've overstepped, Miss Carter. This job was supposed to be temporary, wasn't it?" Emily's throat tightened. "Are you firing me?" "Not yet," he said, eyes glinting. "But I'm considering it. I don't like people who snoop. I haven't—" His voice cut through hers like a blade. "Don't lie to me." The silence that followed was suffocating. Then, softly, almost mockingly, he said, "You're dismissed for the night." Emily turned toward the stairs, every step a struggle to keep from running. She could feel his eyes on her until she disappeared from sight. In her room, she locked the door and sat against it, trembling. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. A message from Daniel flashed on the screen. "Got your footage." Jesus, Emily, this is serious. Don't confront him. I'm sending it to the police. Stay calm. She exhaled shakily, relief and terror mixing like fire and ice. She typed back quickly, "Please hurry. He suspects me." There was no reply. Hours crawled by. She didn't dare sleep. At some point past midnight, she heard shouting downstairs, muffled, frantic. Then, the unmistakable sound of glass shattering. Her heart leapt. The vase. Again. She grabbed her phone and ran downstairs. In the living room, chaos bloomed. The vase lay in ruins across the floor, wine staining the carpet crimson. Mrs. Whitmore stood by the couch, shaking. Mr. Whitmore faced her, his expression unreadable, a predator too calm to be human. "I told you," he said, voice low and deliberate, "never to defy me again." Mrs. Whitmore's voice cracked. "You tried to poison me." He smiled faintly. "That's a serious accusation." Emily's voice broke through the air, sharp and trembling. "It's not an accusation. It's the truth." They both turned toward her. Mr. Whitmore's eyes narrowed. "You again." "Stop it," she said, stepping forward. "I've seen what you've done. The camera saw it too." For a moment, he didn't move. Then his expression shifted. Confusion, then realization, then something cold and dangerous. "Camera?" She pointed toward the mantel. "That clock." He turned, saw the red light, and froze. Mrs. Whitmore gasped softly. Emily took a deep breath. "It recorded everything. The argument, the bottle, all of it. I already sent it to someone. The police are probably on their way." The silence that followed was razor thin. Then, without warning, Mr. Whitmore lunged for the camera. Emily moved instinctively, blocking his path. He grabbed her arm, his grip iron hard. "You think you can destroy me?" he hissed. Mrs. Whitmore screamed. "Harold, stop!" Emily struggled, pain shooting up her arm, but she didn't back down. "It's over," she gasped. "They know." And then, distant but unmistakable, came the sound. Sirens wailing through the night, growing louder with every second. Mr. Whitmore froze, his hand still gripping her. The sound seemed to hollow out the room, filling it with a new kind of silence. Then, slowly, his fingers loosened. The front door burst open. Flashing lights bled into the marble hall. Officers flooded the entryway, their voices commanding, urgent. "Mr. Harold Whitmore, step away from her!" He turned, face blank, and for the first time, Emily saw fear in his eyes. Real, human fear. Mrs. Whitmore collapsed into a chair, sobbing. Emily stood still, breath ragged, as two officers restrained him. He didn't resist, just looked at her, his expression unreadable, a thin smile twitching at the corner of his mouth. "This isn't over," he whispered as they led him away. But it was, at least for now. Outside, the night was cool, the air heavy with the smell of rain and siren smoke. Emily stood on the porch, wrapped in a blanket someone had given her, watching the police cars disappear down the drive. Mrs. Whitmore joined her quietly. "You saved my life," she said, voice raw. "I didn't think anyone would believe me." Emily shook her head. "You saved yourself. I just pressed record." The woman smiled faintly, tears glinting under the porch light. "You're kind, Emily, but kindness can be dangerous in a world like his." Emily didn't answer. She stared out into the night, the forest stretching beyond the estate, dark and endless. Somewhere in the distance, the faintest light was breaking through the clouds, morning trying to find its way back. And though she felt hollow, she also felt something else. Resolve. Because this wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about what came next. She didn't know yet that next would bring its own shadows, whispers of revenge, buried secrets, and a past that refused to stay silent. The morning after the arrest was the quietest Emily had ever heard the house. The Whitmore mansion, once filled with the low murmur of conversations and the faint ticking of clocks, now lay under a silence so thick it felt alive. The police had come and gone. Yellow tape still fluttered across the front steps like a warning to ghosts. Emily sat in the living room, staring at the spot where the broken vase had been swept away, at the pale outline left on the carpet like a wound that refused to heal. The camera was gone now, too, taken by the officers as evidence, but she could still see the faint indentation where it had stood, small and unassuming, the eye that had changed everything. Mrs. Whitmore had spent the night in the guest room upstairs. When the police left, she had retreated there without a word, her face blank, her movements mechanical. Emily had heard her crying through the thin walls once, briefly, before the house fell silent again. Oliver was still asleep. The boy had been kept away from the chaos, safely tucked in a neighbor's home when the sirens came. Emily didn't know what she would say to him when he returned. Daddy's not coming home for a while sounded too cruel, too permanent. But lies felt like poison. The boy had already seen too many of them. Outside, the early light bled across the trees, painting everything in shades of gold and gray. Emily rose from the couch, her legs stiff, and moved to the window. Down the long driveway, she could see a dark car parked near the gates, unmarked, quiet, waiting. She recognized the silhouette leaning against it even before she saw his face. Daniel. The doorbell rang softly. For a moment, she hesitated, afraid the sound might wake the ghosts sleeping in the walls. Then she opened the door. He looked different from the last time she'd seen him, more tired, more serious, his eyes scanning the house behind her like he expected danger to still be lurking there. He offered a faint, weary smile. You look like you haven't slept in days. I haven't, Emily said, voice hoarse. Come in. Daniel stepped inside, glancing around. So this is where it happened. She nodded. The footage, did it reach you in time? Barely, he sighed. We were already moving when you sent the second clip. The bottle, the recording, that was enough probable cause for a warrant. When we got here, he was already... He paused, as if replaying the scene in his mind. He would have hurt you, Emily. Another minute, maybe less. She crossed her arms, shivering despite the morning warmth. He said it wasn't over. Daniel met her eyes. That's just bluster. He'll be in custody for a long time. The DA's office has everything they need. Attempted murder, coercion, fraud. There's no walking away from that. Emily wanted to believe him. She really did. But something in her gut wouldn't let her. The look on Harold Whitmore's face as they led him away had been too calm, too deliberate. Not a man broken, a man biding his time. I need to make sure Oliver and his mother are safe, she said. Can the police? Protective surveillance is already arranged, Daniel interrupted. Your name is on the report too. They'll keep an eye on you. Emily let out a shaky breath, relief mingled with unease. Thank you. Daniel studied her for a moment, his tone softening. You did something brave, Em. Not everyone would have had the guts to stay in this house after what you saw. She managed a faint smile. I didn't stay because I was brave. I stayed because she couldn't leave. He looked at her, really looked, then nodded slowly. You always were like that. For a while, they stood in silence. The house seemed to breathe around them, creaking as if shifting under the weight of what it had witnessed. Finally, Daniel said, I have to head back to the station. I'll call when there's news. Don't go anywhere alone, okay? She promised, though she already knew she wouldn't be able to keep that promise for long. When he left, Emily went upstairs. Mrs. Whitmore's door was slightly open. The woman sat by the window, a thin robe wrapped around her shoulders, a cup of tea untouched beside her. She looked fragile in the morning light, her skin pale as paper. They say he's in jail, she murmured when Emily entered, her gaze still on the horizon. Do you think that means I'm free? Emily hesitated. He can't hurt you anymore. Mrs. Whitmore gave a soft, bitter laugh. Can't he? He's in every corner of this house, in the walls, the books, the wine glasses. I wake up expecting to hear him clearing his throat downstairs. Even now, I can almost smell his cigar smoke. Emily sat down beside her. You could leave, start over somewhere else. You have the means. I have the money, she corrected, but not the will, not yet. She looked at Emily then, her eyes wet but clear. Do you believe people like him ever really disappear? Emily wanted to answer yes. Instead, she said nothing. That night, she dreamed of the camera, the small blinking light, the sound of the vase shattering, Harold's voice like oil seeping through cracks. She woke with a start, the room dark except for the thin blue glow of her phone charging on the nightstand. It was 2:47 a.m. The house was silent. She swung her legs off the bed and padded quietly to the hallway for a glass of water. The shadows stretched long across the floorboards. Halfway down the stairs, she paused. A light was on in the living room. She frowned. Mrs. Whitmore rarely stayed up this late. Emily descended quietly, her heartbeat loud in her ears. The light came from the corner near the mantel, the same place where the camera had been. Except now, impossibly, a faint red dot blinked there again. She froze. The police had taken the camera. She had watched them bag it, label it, and carry it away. But there it was, as if it had never been removed. The same clock, the same blinking light. Mrs. Whitmore? She called softly. No answer. She moved closer. The clock sat perfectly still, humming faintly. She reached out, touched it, and felt a chill. It was warm, as if recently handled. She flipped it over and found a tiny slot that hadn't been there before. A new memory card. Someone had replaced it. A sound came from behind her. Soft, deliberate. Footsteps. Emily spun around. Mrs. Whitmore stood in the doorway, wearing a silk nightgown, her expression unreadable. You shouldn't be up, Emily, she said quietly. I could say the same to you, Emily replied, forcing her voice steady. Did you put this back? Mrs. Whitmore's eyes flicked to the clock, then away. I thought the police took it. They did, Emily whispered. Which means someone came back. A flicker of fear crossed the older woman's face. That's impossible. The security system can be bypassed, Emily finished for her. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Mrs. Whitmore straightened, her composure returning like armor. You're exhausted, my dear. You've been through too much. Let's not invent ghosts. Emily wanted to agree, to let it go. But when she turned back to the clock, something caught her eye. A faint smudge of dark red on the side of the device, dried, almost invisible but unmistakable. Blood. Her stomach dropped. She backed away slowly. Mrs. Whitmore, where were you tonight? The woman blinked, startled. I was here, of course. Why would you ask that? Because someone's been inside this house, Emily said. And if it wasn't you... A sudden crash cut her off, glass breaking somewhere upstairs. Mrs. Whitmore gasped. Emily didn't hesitate. She grabbed the nearest heavy object, a candlestick, and bolted toward the staircase. The second-floor hallway was dark, shadows stretching like fingers. Another sound echoed from Oliver's room, a muffled thud, followed by silence. Oliver! She called, running. She flung the door open. The room was empty. The window stood ajar, curtains fluttering in the night wind. Panic hit her like a wave. He's gone! She shouted down the stairs. Mrs. Whitmore's scream answered her. Emily leaned out the window. Below, near the edge of the lawn, a figure was disappearing into the trees. carrying something small and limp in their arms. Her mind blanked. Then she ran. The air outside was sharp, cutting her lungs as she sprinted across the wet grass. The figure moved fast, but she was faster. Branches whipped against her arms, roots tore at her shoes. She could hear Oliver's faint whimpering ahead. Alive, thank God. Alive. "Stop!" she shouted. "Put him down!" The figure turned, and the world seemed to stop. It wasn't Harold Whitmore. It was one of the house staff, Richard, the driver. His face was pale, sweat glistening under the moonlight. His eyes darted wildly, fear and desperation colliding in them. "He told me to!" Richard cried, holding the boy tighter. "He said if I didn't, he'd—" "Harold's in jail," Emily said, stepping closer. "He can't tell you anything anymore." "You don't understand," the man sobbed. "He's not in jail. Not anymore." The words hit her like ice. "What?" Richard's grip faltered just as flashing lights appeared through the trees. Police cars sweeping across the estate. He dropped to his knees, hands raised, Oliver tumbling safely into Emily's arms. Officers surrounded them seconds later, shouting commands, dragging Richard away. Emily held Oliver close, whispering over and over, "It's okay. You're safe. You're safe." But her mind was spinning, not in jail. When the chaos settled, Daniel appeared again, his face grim. "They just called me from downtown," he said quietly. "Harold Whitmore posted bail 2 hours ago. His lawyers worked fast. He's out." Emily's breath caught. "He sent the driver." Daniel nodded. "Looks like it." Mrs. Whitmore arrived moments later, running across the lawn in her bare feet, sobbing as she scooped Oliver into her arms. For a brief, fragile moment, the world seemed still again. Mother and son clinging to each other under the thin light of police floodlamps. But Emily knew that peace wouldn't last. Not while Harold was still free. Daniel turned to her. "We'll get him back. I promise." Emily looked past him, toward the house. The massive silhouette rising against the sky, its windows dark and hollow. She thought of the camera, the blood on its frame, the feeling that someone had been watching her even when she thought she was alone. "Promise me one thing," she said quietly. "What's that?" "If he comes back, make sure he doesn't walk out again." Daniel met her gaze, and for once he didn't try to reassure her. He just nodded. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the faint echo of laughter. Oliver's, free and bright, fading into the distance. But somewhere deeper in the woods, unseen, another sound answered. The crack of a twig, the slow, steady rhythm of footsteps retreating into the dark. Harold Whitmore was gone, but he was far from finished. Emily tightened her grip on Oliver, feeling his small heartbeat against hers, and stared into the shadows beyond the police lights. The story wasn't over. Not yet. It was only pausing. The kind of pause that comes before something worse. Rain fell in a steady, relentless rhythm that night, drumming against the mansion's windows like impatient fingers. The Whitmore estate had become both sanctuary and prison, a fortress wrapped in fear. The police patrols came and went, their headlights briefly cutting through the darkness before vanishing down the long driveway. Inside, the lights were dimmed to a low golden hush. Everything looked calm, but beneath that fragile stillness, tension coiled tight as wire. Emily sat by the fire with Oliver sleeping on her lap, his small fingers clutching the edge of her sweater. He'd been quiet ever since the kidnapping attempt, his voice soft and unsure, his eyes searching shadows that weren't there. Each time the wind rattled the windows, he flinched. She ran her hand through his hair, whispering, "It's over now. You're safe." But even as she said it, she wasn't sure she believed it. Across the room, Mrs. Whitmore stared into the flames, a half-empty glass of wine trembling in her hand. She hadn't slept in 2 days. Her once perfect composure had begun to crack, showing flashes of the woman beneath, brittle, terrified, haunted. "They said he was gone," she murmured, almost to herself. "They said he'd never come back." Emily looked up. "The police will find him. Daniel." "Daniel can't stop him," Mrs. Whitmore interrupted sharply, then softened. "I used to think money could build walls high enough to keep the world out. But Harold, he always finds a way back in." The fire popped, sending sparks into the air. The scent of smoke and rain mingled in the room, heavy and intimate. Emily's thoughts drifted to the camera, the one that had reappeared like a curse. The memory of its blinking red light still burned behind her eyelids. Who had replaced it? Richard, the driver, had claimed Harold ordered him, but that meant Harold had been planning even before he escaped. The thought chilled her. Mrs. Whitmore rose abruptly, setting her glass down too hard. "I can't stay here," she said. "Not another night. Every sound in this house feels like him." "Where would you go?" Emily asked. The older woman hesitated, looking out the window at the rain-slick driveway. "There's a summer house in Rhode Island. No one knows about it, not even his lawyers. My father left it to me before he passed. We could leave tonight." "We?" Mrs. Whitmore turned to her. "You and Oliver. He trusts you. And I don't think I could manage without help." Emily's gaze fell on the sleeping boy. The thought of waking him, bundling him into a car, driving through the storm to some unknown place. It terrified her, but staying terrified her more. "All right," she said finally. "Let's go." They moved quickly, quietly. Emily packed a small bag. Clothes for Oliver, documents, cash, the USB drive where she'd saved backup copies of the footage. Mrs. Whitmore gathered jewelry and a few personal items. The house seemed to watch them as they moved, every creak of the floorboards like a question. By midnight, they were ready. The rain had lightened, but fog rolled thick across the grounds. The car, Mrs. Whitmore's silver Range Rover, gleamed wet under the dim garage light. Emily helped Oliver into the back seat, wrapping a blanket around him. He stirred but didn't wake. Mrs. Whitmore slid into the driver's seat, her hands trembling slightly on the steering wheel. "Do you have the keys?" Emily asked. She nodded, forcing a shaky smile. "Yes, let's get the hell out of here." The engine roared to life, low and smooth. They rolled down the driveway slowly, headlights cutting through mist. For a fleeting moment, Emily allowed herself to breathe. The house grew smaller in the rearview mirror, a shadow swallowed by rain. But halfway down the drive, the lights flickered. Not from the car, but from behind them. Emily turned. A second pair of headlights had appeared at the top of the hill. Her stomach dropped. "Someone's following us." Mrs. Whitmore's grip tightened on the wheel. "Hold on." She pressed the accelerator. The tires splashed through puddles, gravel spitting under the wheels. The other car sped up too. "Maybe it's the police patrol," Emily said, though her voice betrayed the doubt she felt. "No patrol drives without sirens," Mrs. Whitmore snapped. The road narrowed as they reached the main gate. The headlights behind them grew larger, closer. A horn blared. Then, bang! Something struck the rear bumper. The car lurched. Oliver jolted awake, crying out. "Mommy!" "It's okay, baby!" Mrs. Whitmore shouted, swerving hard. The Range Rover fishtailed on the slick road but didn't spin out. Emily turned in her seat just as a flash of lightning illuminated the driver of the pursuing car. Her heart stopped. Harold. His eyes glowed pale in the glare, mouth twisted in a grin that didn't belong to the living. "He's here," Emily whispered, voice breaking. "It's him." Mrs. Whitmore's breath hitched, but she didn't slow down. "Hold tight!" They burst through the gates, metal scraping the sides of the car as they tore onto the road beyond. The other vehicle followed, close enough that Emily could see its grille reflected in the rear window. Rain poured harder, slashing sideways. The road ahead twisted through dense forest, slick and narrow. Emily's hands clenched around Oliver's shoulders. The boy was sobbing now, eyes wide with terror. "Why is Daddy chasing us?" he cried. Mrs. Whitmore's voice broke. "Because Daddy doesn't know how to love the right way." The chase felt endless. Headlights flashed through the trees, reflecting off wet asphalt like lightning. Then, another crash. The car jolted violently, spinning off the road. Emily screamed. The world blurred. Trees, metal, glass. A shattering impact. Silence. When Emily opened her eyes, everything hurt. The car had come to rest in a shallow ditch, smoke curling from the hood. Rain hissed against the hot metal. Mrs. Whitmore groaned beside her, dazed but conscious. Oliver whimpered in the back, unhurt. Then came the sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Emily turned her head, every muscle protesting. Through the shattered windshield, she saw him. Harold Whitmore, stepping through the rain in his dark coat, face calm, almost serene. "Vivian," he called softly, his voice carrying through the downpour. "You didn't think it would be that easy, did you?" Mrs. Whitmore struggled to unbuckle her seatbelt. "You're insane," she spat. "The police—" "Won't get here in time," he said, smiling. "They never do." Emily fumbled for the door handle. It was jammed. Panic clawed up her throat. Harold moved closer, his shadow falling over the hood. The rain soaked him completely, but he didn't seem to notice. He looked like something risen from the grave. And in a way, he was. "Leave her alone," Emily shouted. He tilted his head. "Ah, the babysitter. Always watching, always meddling." His voice softened, mocking. "You think you're the hero in this story?" Emily glared at him. "No, I just think you're not getting away with it." For a split second, his expression shifted. Admiration, maybe, or rage. Then he lifted something from his pocket. A gun. Mrs. Whitmore froze. "Harold, please." He raised the weapon, aiming straight at her. "You were supposed to drink it, Vivian. That's all you had to do, but you had to make everything difficult." Emily's mind raced. The door wouldn't budge. The seatbelt wouldn't release. Her eyes darted to the glove compartment. A faint metallic glint caught her attention. The flashlight. As Harold stepped closer, she grabbed it and flung it forward with all her strength. The beam hit his face, blinding him for a split second. He cursed, firing instinctively. The shot shattered the passenger window, spraying glass. Mrs. Whitmore screamed. Emily kicked her door again. It burst open this time. She stumbled out into the rain, clutching Oliver's arm as she dragged him free. "Run!" she yelled. They bolted into the trees, branches whipping at their faces. The forest was a maze of black and silver. Behind them, Harold shouted, a sound more animal than human. Another gunshot cracked through the storm, thudding into a tree inches from Emily's head. "Faster!" she cried. They burst into a clearing, mud sucking at their shoes. Ahead stood an old boathouse, half collapsed, its roof sagging under decades of neglect. Emily pushed Oliver inside, pulling Mrs. Whitmore behind her. They crouched low in the dark, breathing hard. The smell of rot and damp wood filled the air. Mrs. Whitmore clutched her son, whispering prayers. Emily pressed a finger to her lips. Outside, footsteps approached. Slow, deliberate. Harold's voice drifted through the rain. "Come out, Vivian. Let's end this properly." Emily scanned the room. The boathouse was small, cluttered with old tools, rusted cans, and an overturned rowboat. In the corner, she spotted an old fuel canister, half full from the smell. She grabbed it, her mind racing. Mrs. Whitmore's eyes widened. "What are you?" Emily whispered. "When I say run, take Oliver and go. Don't stop. But promise me." Footsteps drew nearer. The door creaked open, light slicing through the dark. Harold stepped inside, gun raised, his silhouette framed by the storm. "I loved you once," he said softly to his wife. "You could have had everything, but you had to bring her into it." His gaze shifted to Emily. The little spy. Emily didn't move. "You're right," she said. "I did bring something." Then she flung the fuel canister. It struck the ground between them, splashing liquid across the floor. Before Harold could react, she grabbed the old lighter from the table and sparked it. For an instant, the world froze. Then fire bloomed, bright and roaring. "Run!" she screamed. Mrs. Whitmore pulled Oliver through the back door as flames engulfed the boathouse. Harold shouted, stumbling backward, his coat catching fire. Emily dove through the doorway, the heat licking at her heels. She landed hard in the mud outside, coughing, the rain already turning to steam around the blaze. Behind her, the boathouse burned like a beacon in the storm. Mrs. Whitmore clutched Oliver, sobbing. Emily staggered to her feet, her lungs burning. She looked back. Through the fire, she could just make out Harold's figure collapsing, swallowed by the flames. Then came silence. Only rain. The fire hissed and sputtered, then slowly died down. What remained was a blackened ruin. Emily sank to her knees, exhausted. Mrs. Whitmore approached, trembling, and knelt beside her. "Is he?" Emily nodded weakly. "It's over." But even as she said it, she knew the story wasn't finished. Because in the flickering remnants of the fire, something glinted, a flash of metal half buried in the ash. The gun. And near it, a single footprint leading away into the trees. Emily's heart clenched. Not over. Not yet. The storm had passed by dawn, but the air still trembled with the memory of thunder. Smoke curled from the ruins of the boathouse, mingling with the mist that drifted off the lake. The sky above was a bruised palette of pale lavender and gray, streaked with the faint gold of a hesitant sunrise. Emily stood at the edge of the clearing, her hair plastered to her face, her clothes heavy with rain and soot. Every muscle in her body ached. The night's chaos clung to her like a second skin, the fire, the screams, the scent of burning wood and flesh. She wanted to believe it was over, that the nightmare had finally burned itself out, but the silence was too clean, too complete, the kind that follows not peace, but aftermath. Mrs. Whitmore and Oliver sat a few feet away on a fallen log, wrapped in a blanket one of the paramedics had given them. The boy's small face was buried against his mother's shoulder, his body trembling with exhaustion. Mrs. Whitmore stroked his hair absently, her gaze fixed on the blackened wreck before them. Her expression was unreadable. Shock, grief, relief, maybe all of it twisted into something beyond language. Emily didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. She had given her statement to the police, answered every question until her throat was dry. They had combed through the ruins, found Harold's gun half melted among the debris, but no body. The fire had been too intense, too consuming. The chief investigator had told them it was highly likely that Harold Whitmore had perished in the blaze. Highly likely. The words echoed in Emily's mind like an unfinished sentence. Daniel approached from behind her, his coat slung over his arm, his face pale with exhaustion. He stopped beside her, staring at the ruins. "They'll run DNA tests," he said quietly, "but it'll take time." Emily nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "You don't believe he's dead either?" Daniel hesitated. "I've seen men like him, Em. They don't go down easy. But even if he somehow made it out, he's finished. The police are on full alert. Every highway out of the state is being watched. He can't hide forever." She wanted to believe that, to let it be enough. But the forest beyond the lake stretched endless and deep, the kind of place that could swallow secrets whole. "Men like him don't hide," she murmured. "They haunt." Daniel turned to her, studying her face. "You saved them. You saved yourself. Don't let him take that from you, too. Emily's throat tightened. It doesn't feel like saving. It feels like surviving something that shouldn't have happened. He didn't argue. He simply reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder, solid, grounding, a small anchor in the chaos. Go home, he said gently. Get some rest. I'll handle the rest from here. Home. The word felt foreign. What was home now? The small apartment she hadn't seen in weeks? The mansion that reeked of ghosts? She turned toward Mrs. Whitmore and Oliver, who were still huddled together under the blanket. Maybe home wasn't a place anymore. Maybe it was the fragile bond that had formed between three people who had lived through something unspeakable. When the sun finally broke through the clouds, they drove back to the estate in silence. The house stood waiting, its grand facade somehow smaller, humbled by everything that had happened. The once immaculate garden was trampled, the front gates bent and twisted from the escape. Inside, the smell of smoke and rain clung to every surface. Mrs. Whitmore led Oliver upstairs to his room. The boy clung to her hand, too tired to speak. Emily followed them halfway, then stopped at the landing. Her gaze drifted toward the living room, the place where it had all begun, where lies had shattered like porcelain. The mantel was empty now, the clock camera gone, the space bare and strange. She descended the stairs slowly, each step echoing through the hollow house. When she reached the living room, she sank onto the couch and stared at the fireplace. Ash lay in the grate, gray and delicate as snow. The memories came in flashes. Harold's voice dripping with malice, the broken vase, the sound of Oliver crying in the dark. Every image flickered like a film reel on loop, impossible to pause, impossible to forget. A soft voice pulled her from the spiral. You should rest, Mrs. Whitmore said gently. She stood in the doorway, pale but composed, a ghost learning how to be human again. I will, Emily said, though she knew she wouldn't. Mrs. Whitmore crossed the room and sat beside her. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was no longer sharp. It was heavy, but shared, the kind that comes only after too many words have been spoken. Finally, Mrs. Whitmore said, You could leave now. You've done more for us than anyone had the right to ask. I can't imagine what you've been through. Emily looked at her hands. The faint scars from the fire were still visible, small reminders etched into her skin. I don't know if I can just walk away, she admitted. Oliver, he still wakes up at night. He still looks for answers. Mrs. Whitmore smiled sadly. He's a child. He'll heal faster than we will. Maybe. Emily hesitated. But you need someone here until he does. For a moment, the older woman said nothing. Then she nodded, tears glimmering in her eyes. Then stay. Not as an employee, not as a nanny. As family. Emily's throat tightened, and she nodded wordlessly. Days turned into weeks. The mansion changed. The staff left, one by one, unable to bear the whispers that followed them through the halls. Mrs. Whitmore sold off most of Harold's art collection and used the money to rebuild the guest cottage near the lake, a smaller, warmer space that felt nothing like the house where so much pain had lived. Emily moved there with Oliver, while Mrs. Whitmore stayed in the main house, slowly learning to exist without fear. The police kept in touch, but the case grew colder with each passing week. No remains had been identified from the fire, no sightings confirmed. Some nights, Emily woke to the sound of rain on the roof and thought she saw a shadow moving near the tree line. She'd rise, heart pounding, and find nothing. The forest always looked empty, but emptiness, she had learned, could lie. Oliver began to laugh again. He started school, made friends, learned to sleep without a light on. Once, when Emily tucked him in, he whispered, Do you think Daddy's in heaven? She hesitated, then said softly, I think wherever he is, he can't hurt anyone anymore. He seemed to accept that. "Good," he said, and turned on his side, already drifting to sleep. Life settled into a fragile rhythm, mornings filled with the smell of coffee and pancakes, afternoons of quiet reading, evenings by the lake where the sunset bled into water like paint. For the first time in years, Mrs. Whitmore smiled without flinching. Sometimes she and Emily would sit together on the porch, watching Oliver play, and speak of things that had nothing to do with death. Books, music, the small kindnesses of ordinary days. Yet beneath it all, a part of Emily remained alert, listening for footsteps that never came. It was late autumn when the letter arrived. No return address, just her name written in sharp, deliberate handwriting. The paper smelled faintly of smoke. She opened it at the kitchen table, hands trembling. "You recorded everything. You thought that meant you understood me. But what you saw was only one truth. There's another. You'll find it when you're ready. No signature. No threat. Just that." She read it 3 times, her pulse quickening. The police traced it back to a postal box in another state, but no fingerprints were found. Daniel came by the next day, worry etched across his face. "Could be a hoax," he said. "Reporters still dig into the story sometimes." "Or it could be him," Emily said quietly. Daniel didn't answer. That night, she stood by the lake, holding the letter over the water. The moon hung low and full, reflecting off the ripples like a second world. For a long time, she just stared, the paper trembling in her hand. Then she let it go. The wind caught it, carrying it across the water until it vanished into the darkness. The next morning, she woke to sunlight streaming through the curtains. The world felt lighter somehow. She went into Oliver's room to find him drawing at his desk, a bright picture of the lake, the cottage, and 3 stick figures holding hands. When he saw her, he beamed. "That's you," he said, pointing at the figure in the middle. "You make us safe." Her eyes stung, but she smiled. "That's what family's for." Time moved forward. Seasons shifted. The mansion was sold eventually, too heavy with memories to be a home. Mrs. Whitmore and Oliver moved to a smaller house near the coast, closer to the sea she'd grown up by. Emily followed them for a while, helping with the transition, until one morning she received a call from a law firm in New York, the same one that had once turned her away. They offered her a position. When she told Mrs. Whitmore, the woman smiled through tears. "He would be proud of you," she said softly. "Not Harold, your mother." Emily's heart clenched. "I don't know if I can leave you." "You're not leaving," Mrs. Whitmore said. "You're living." And so she went. New York was noisy and alive, a world away from the haunted stillness of Connecticut. She rented a small apartment overlooking the Hudson. The city lights at night reminded her of the camera's red blink. Except this time, the light didn't mean danger. It meant life, constant and unyielding. She visited often, birthdays, holidays, ordinary weekends, and every time she returned, Oliver ran to her, arms open, shouting her name. The fear that once defined them had become memory, softened by time. Years later, on a quiet spring evening, Emily stood again by the lake near the ruins of the old estate. The boathouse had never been rebuilt. The trees had grown thicker around it, their roots swallowing what was left. The water was calm, the sky pink with sunset. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply. Maybe Harold Whitmore had died in the fire. Maybe he hadn't. It didn't matter anymore. The terror he'd built his life upon had burned away, leaving only silence. Not the suffocating kind, but a peace she had earned. Emily knelt by the water's edge, letting her fingers brush the surface. The reflection that stared back wasn't the frightened babysitter who had walked into that house months ago. It was someone else, older, stronger, no longer afraid of the dark. In the distance, she heard a child's laughter. Oliver's, carried on the wind. The sound wrapped around her like warmth. She smiled, stood, and turned toward it. As she walked back toward the cottage, the last light of day fell across the lake, shimmering like a promise. It was over. Finally. Completely. Not with vengeance, not with fear, but with quiet. The kind that meant healing. The kind that meant home.